they refer to me often as a polymath or a Renaissance man. I exactly don't know what a polymath is because I'm very bad at math. But the Renaissance man I understand somewhat. But I think the rabbi actually figured out the best way to explain this, that I do actually three different things. But he was so gracious in pointing them out and crediting me as doing them well. So thank you very much, Rabbi. I'd like to thank Naomi Vilko, of course, who is someone for whom I'm connected to the synagogue, and she's the person the one I came to because of her. I don't know how well you know Naomi, but she is someone clearly for whom the past is always very present, and that is a real honor because we live in a world of utter amnesia and forgetfulness and very short time horizons and sound bites, and this is a woman who's holding everything. She's storing and archiving everything. I also want to thank the viewers from JBS TV and Mark Golub and the staff, the team of people who produce those shows. I do appear often on JBS TV. I must say, for those of you who watch it, it is a treasure. It's a treasure in the Jewish community. It is something that I think everybody should be supporting. There is simply nothing else like it. Again, if you watch CNN, you hear sound bites. If you watch Mark Golub, you hear thoughtful, long conversation. Entertaining, thoughtful, and it's not just about politics and government. It's also about Jewish art and culture, and I think it's an essential aspect of the Jewish cultural experience, and hope you continue to watch JBS TV and support it. I want to start off by saying, the thing about the Iranians, there's many things to say, but at least let's admit that they do make good carpets. And I think that people don't, with all this criticism about them, the Persian rugs thing, that's still working. The problem with the enrichment of uranium, the centrifuges, is a very different thing, but at least let's continue to credit this. And I mean this seriously because we have so successfully demonized the Iran, and maybe to some degree for good reason. Certainly they are led by mullahs who have, very much not only medieval practices, but sort of a bit of the evil in them. And I'm going to talk a little more about that today. And I think that this is something that's important because we are clearly underestimating what Islamism means, what Islamic extremism is. We're underestimating it. We're treating it like people who just went to college and studied communism and studied Nazism and studied post-structuralism and really didn't study Islamism and didn't study what we're actually facing. And this is very different, and this is why you hear all the time about the Iran deal. Well, we were able to do this with the Japanese after World War II, and we were able to accept the terms of surrender with the Nazis after World War II, and we went through the Cold War, and we negotiated with the Soviet Union, and how come it can't work with Iran? It's because they're not those countries. Those are very different societies. They think differently. They have a very different sense of what their future can look like. They're much more rational. Remember, the Cold War was a Cold War. It never went hot, which gives you a sense that both sides actually believed that it would be insanity to engage in nuclear warfare. That was why they called it mutually assured destruction. Both sides understood what that means. Who wants that? But there is one side, a very strong element of the Islamic world, the world of Islamic extremism, for whom the afterlife is what matters. And this life, this temporal life, is largely irrelevant. And I'll talk a little more about that, but we should not, use false comparisons, misplaced analogies. They're not necessarily the same. Some negotiations with countries work, but it's based on premises of rational argument, the basic principle that we can come to terms about our disagreements. Let me just say a few things about the Iran deal. It's a foregone conclusion. The deal is going through by now. I know that this is a sensitive issue here. You have Senator Menendez, you have Senator Booker. I understand what it feels like to be, I guess, a New Jersey Jew. But one of the things that I've been troubled by, and I haven't written about it yet, I just haven't been busy, But I've been troubled by that we haven't wondered why the administration, knowing the amount of blowback it received, wouldn't have taken other measures outside the deal. There were things that could be done that I think would have had a huge effect on Jewish Americans. For instance, proposing legislation in Congress authorizing what kinds of military arrangements would take place once the Iranians cheat, so that we're not debating this anymore, that we send a message to Iran immediately. We're not messing with you. We don't trust you. We're not kidding. We don't trust you. And the reason for this is we're going to Congress right now to get loaded up. We want to know exactly what happens when you cheat. And by the way, we're going to watch you. You know, you didn't want, for reasons we can understand, you didn't want your mischief and mayhem and murder in the world of your fomenting terrorism around the world to be part of the deal. That's fine. We left it out of the deal, but it's not. But our Congress has already is going to vote on legislation that says that we're going to take that seriously, that we're insisting on actually responding to your acts of terror around the world. The issues of verification and monitoring. You know, I think the president should have said, look, you know, I admit it's going to be really hard, and this 24-day waiting period is utter nonsense, and I'm really, look, this is the way we cut the deal. The Iranians wouldn't cut any other deal. But we're doing everything else, either satellites, counter-espionage, cyber attacks. Remember what was it called, the Stuxnets, right? We remind Americans, we have the capacity to mess with their machines, to mess with their heads, and we're going to do it. And Mossad and the CIA, we're going to do this all the time. We're going to drive them insane. Every time they try to spin one centrifuge, something will go wrong, and it'll be because of us. Tell us that that's where you are, President Obama, that you're serious about this, and you're willing to put the interests of the United States and the hardware and the counterintelligence to work towards foiling any effort to cheat. I was surprised that we didn't hear immediately about, you know, you've heard of these mountain buster bombs that could be used by the Israelis to get inside these nuclear installations. President Obama should have been on first day. Look, I understand Israel's disappointed with this deal. I understand. Look, I'm not thrilled with it either. Understand Jewish Americans feel great anguish about it. What you don't know is I've already sent naval ships to Israel. If they've got those bombs, it's there. They'll be there in 6 hours, by the way. All those buster bombs is going to be there. And by the way, we have redoubled our efforts to finally finish the second iteration of Iron Dome. Because, you know, just like the Apple 6, there's always an Apple 7. There is, in fact, an Iron Dome 2, right? And that hasn't come out yet. And the president should have said, we are now redoubling our efforts, and that stuff is whatever I don't know what it looks like, but it's going to be sent to Israel instantly, and it's going to be sending essentially a message to the Iranians. If you fire ballistic missiles at this country, you are wasting your money. You can do it, but you're wasting your money. And there's one more thing I would have asked President Obama to do. I think he should have got on Air Force One and flown immediately to Jerusalem. And I think he should have gone to Prime Minister Netanyahu and simply put his arm around him and said, you know what, I don't even like this guy. I really don't. We don't get along. But on this day, I want the world to know I really have this guy's back. I'm holding his back. I want the Iranians to know when it comes to this region of the world, I'm with the democracy. I'm with the liberal principles. I'm with the people that believe in a pluralistic society. I'm the people that believe in living in the 21st century. I'm with these people. We've always been with Israel. We cut this deal with you, but I don't want there to be any confusion. An attack on this country is treated as an attack on the United States. Imagine how amazing those four things would have been, how symbolic. By the way, I stole that last one from the Brooklyn Dodgers. Remember Pee Wee Reese did that with Jackie Robinson. It was very powerful, right? Jackie Robinson was being denigrated every ballpark he went to. Pee Wee Reese was a Southern cracker. He was a redneck. But he knew that when it came to his team, Jackie Robinson deserved to be protected. And right before a game, he comes from shortstop. I mean, you can go look this up on the internet. It's a pretty great photograph. And Pee Wee Reese just puts his arm around Jackie Robinson, and Jackie Robinson doesn't even know why he's doing it. And it's before the game starts. It's to send a message to everyone in the, he's with me. He is my teammate. There is no, there's no divisiveness. There is no dispute where my interests are aligned with. It's with Israel. It's not with any other nation in this part of the world. And I think symbolically, those four things would have been incredibly powerful. And I think we would have been able to accept some of the tremendous limitations of this deal because the president actually, this is not a wartime consigliere president. We know this. This is not a this is a president that likes to withdraw from wars, not to enter wars. You had to know this, right? You had to know this in advance. This is an American president who really has always been critical of American exceptionalism. This is an American president that sees America as having engaged in colonial mischief around the world. We're not, with this particular president, going to war for this is not something he would have done. And so instead, he walked away with a really bad deal because he negotiated with people who don't negotiate. And we're going to talk in a few minutes about why they don't even negotiate. But he could have done other things to reassure Israel and reassure people who are worried about this deal. It may be only symbolic. It may be in the minds of many people here or people watching at home might say, it's better to have had no deal than Thane Rosenbaum's 4 little suggestions. I agree. But what we have now is just ugly, unnecessary, and it's surreal in a way. It does seem surreal. You know who thinks it's surreal? The Saudis thinks it's surreal. The Egyptians thinks it's surreal. Everyone in that part of the world that's worried about, afraid of Iran doesn't understand what Obama's doing. They're mystified by this. It's incomprehensible. And so there could have been ways to signal that there is a bad deal on the table, and it is one that we've essentially accepted. But it doesn't mean that the United States does not have other mechanisms to send a message that we are not of two minds when it comes to Israel's security and the need to protect Israel and to need to protect the entire region from Iran. I know I gave you a Persian rug joke, but I will also tell you, people forget, I was watching CNN the other day, and they were doing this, decades thing of the 70s, and nobody talks about the Iranian hostage crisis. Like, nobody wants to talk about, this is who we're dealing with. We were hostages several decades ago, right? Their level of hatred towards us is immense, right? It's not just the little Satan. It's really the big Satan. And we're not acting as if we recognize that threat. The ancient Greeks, Sparta had trouble with Persia. Of course, we know from the Mordecai story, Jews did, Alexander the Great. That part of the world is scary. It has always been scary, and they're always in this kind of expansionist mode, and we should not be naive in discounting it. So let me just briefly go through a number of things that speak to the broader topic, and then I'll come back at the end quickly. And I promise I won't stay long, because you guys want to watch Federer. I understand. There's things to do. I should have said that at the first. There's so many things. There was rain and Federer, and you all still came out. Here's the bad news. When Naomi and I crafted the theme for today, is this Deja vu, 1930s all over again? It's worse than that. I think it's worse than the 1930s. I think we should wish for the 1930s. And I don't want to scare you all. I don't want you to get bad dreams. But it's pretty bad. In 2011, 59% of Europeans across 15 different countries said that Israel is the world's greatest danger to peace. 69% of 15 countries said, in the entire world, who's really scary, right? It's Israel. And this was all happening, by the way, during Arab Spring. So they're watching television, and they're watching dictatorships fall, and Islamists, attacking each other, and there's killings in the street, and there's raping in the street, and they're saying, no, it's actually Israel's the problem. It's nowhere else. In 2012, 40% of Germans said that Israel was an impediment to peace. The Germans are Israel's best ally. That's pretty bad. right? That 48% said Israel is the impediment to peace. And in Germany, in that same poll, they said only 22% of the people said Iran was. So more than half the people actually thought that Iran is a much safer place in the hands of the world than Israel. Canadian Jews are 25 times more likely to be attacked than American Jews. So if you have relatives in Toronto or Montreal, have them move to New Jersey because they are 25 more times likely. This is another statistic that we are not focusing on. In our hemisphere, Canada is experiencing an incredible amount of uptick of anti-Semitism. Every year it's getting worse and worse. And that, by the way, is with a prime minister who loves Israel, right? And we're still, when it comes to what is it like for Jews on the street, that's what it's like. French Jews are 40 times more likely than you to be subject to an anti-Semitic attack. Maybe that you probably would have figured out. In 2013, 23% of all Jews across Europe said that they would no longer wear any religious garb, attire, or any Jewish symbols of any kind. 1 out of 4 won't do that. We know the immigration numbers in France. 2014, 7,000 made Aliyah. In 2015, they're projecting now over 15,000 French Jews. Over 15,000. Think about the French restaurants in Tel Aviv that we're going to have. Think about how much better dressed the Israelis will be. You know? I mean, seriously. Think about the wine will be better. Everything will be better because of this importation of the French. They're predicting 50,000 overall, additional 50,000 Jews over the next several years, which will be 10% of all of France's Jewish population will have made Aliyah. And I'm giving you these numbers because they're hard numbers. They're hard to process, but they're concrete. And this way, you should walk around when you go to cocktail parties. You should throw these numbers out. I hope you're taking notes because this is really a sort of quick tutorial about how bad really is it. We remember the story of Ilan Halimi, the boy who worked in the cell phone store outside of Paris, in a suburb of Paris, who was tortured for 24 days. They just made a movie out of it called 24 Days. I haven't seen it, but I talked to the director recently, but it's called 24 Days, and it's really about the mother's attempt to negotiate with the people who were torturing her son. She didn't realize that. They were all Islamic. They were all Islamists. They were all young Muslims, and they had a name for themselves. Are you ready for it? You can't make this stuff up. You know what it was? Gang of Barbarians, right? That's their name, right? They're down with the barbarian thing. They're happy to actually promote themselves with this name, right? Barbarians, the Gang of Barbarians. We certainly know during the Gaza war, 200 French Jews were trapped inside a synagogue in Paris while an angry mob, mostly made up of Islamists, screamed Hamas, Hamas, Jews to the gas, right? One of the great rhymes of last summer. We know the story about the rabbi and his three students from a Jewish day school in Toulouse that were killed. We, of course, know the story from this past January, the kosher market outside of Paris. 4 Jews were killed. 4 were killed inside the Jewish Museum of Brussels within the last year. Some things that people don't know that I've been following. There was a smoke bomb in a kosher grocery in Sarcelles in France. That didn't get very much attention. There were burnings of Israeli flags in Barbès in France. Just last week, a UK teenager was beaten in London. I don't know if anyone picked up on that story. A 19-year-old French woman was raped, and her Jewish boyfriend was forced to watch the rape. And the entire time they kept screaming, Jewish, Israeli, Israeli, as they raped her. In Rome, there's been anti-Semitic graffiti. I hope I'm not really scaring you, but I really want to scare you. I want you to understand when Naomi comes up with, is it like the 1930s? Well, let's really take a look. Let's not just throw these abstract questions. Let's take a look. What does it really compare? We assume it can't possibly be like that. You know how we know that? Because everyone got so mad at Governor Huckabee for what he said. And I might have been the only person I knew who went, wait a minute, has anyone, I'm not someone who invokes the word Auschwitz and ovens very often in a misapplied way, but I'm not sure that was misapplied. When it comes to where the Iranian intentions are, we're going to talk about it a little more, I'm not so sure that he was wrong. In Rome, there's spray painting of graffiti, of swastikas and anti-Semitic messages. In Denmark, of course, we saw the attack on the synagogue outside. It killed a security guard. Norway had to close their Jewish museum during a large portion of the Gaza war because of threats. There were thousands of protesters in Vienna, in Amsterdam, in London during the Gaza war, thousands protesting against Israel. England is reporting a 50% increase in anti-Semitic acts, 50%. You may have followed the European parliamentary elections from around 2 years ago. Extremist right-wing parties won seats in many of the countries, and in fact won more seats. They actually were the leading party in France and in England. In France and England, extremist right-wing groups received more votes than anyone else. In Hungary, the Jobbik party came in second place. They're so avowedly anti-Semitic. Their forerunners, what were they called? The something Iron Cross, the Iron Cross from Hungary. I mean, is that what they were called? Arrow Cross, right? Thank you so much. The Arrow Cross, in their graves are saying, we were not as crazy as these people. This is the Jobbik party. Extremist right-wing groups won seats in Denmark, in Sweden, in Greece. In Greece, the party, the Golden Dawn, go look this up if you don't, although it will scare you. Their uniforms look exactly like SS uniforms. They're called the Golden Dawn. Now, you could say this is brought upon about a worldwide economic recession, the European debt crisis, unemployment, but there's no violence anywhere else. It's only violence against Jews. You can blame unemployment to some extent if there's just random acts of violence everywhere, right? Economic crime. We say that all the time. What do you expect people to do? No, this isn't about that, right? This is about something else. The largest problem about Europe is that we're not being honest about all of these crimes in Europe are really, for the most part, committed by Muslims. It's an Islamic problem. It's an Islamic problem that was imported to Europe. That's where it is. And the real problem is that we've, again, misapplied our analysis by thinking about, who can you negotiate with? These people who are Islamists, again, I'm making these distinctions between people who are living in a strict application of Sharia law and believe in the spreading of the caliphate, right? The Islamist world is the world of the metaphysical world. It's about the afterlife. This is not a group that's interested in an ideological theory formula. This is purely theocratic. This is just Islam. This is not a people that are debating and reading Marxism or communism or Nazism. This is, they're not looking to get into friendly rhetorical debates about political theory. The only thing that matters is the Quran and how the Quran is being interpreted. Similarly, this is the part that, Secretary of State Kerry and President Obama, I think, just completely misjudge. People always say about George W. Bush that he didn't really know the difference between Sunnis and Shiites. And that's really bad, right? And that shows how unsophisticated he is. But let me tell you something about President Obama. He has no understanding of the Arab mind. He has no understanding of the Islamists' point of view. He thinks it's all like at Harvard Law School, where faculty members talk very casually to each other and they have these rigorous debates and they get to go to lunch together. And he sees things in those ways, that everybody can come to terms and everyone, through mutual respect and common civility, can arrive at some decisions. But this isn't, I was just doing an interview with at the 92nd Street Y with Ayaan Hirsi Ali. Some of you may know she is, and she said, she's so great. She was born into Islamic world, Islamic culture. She's experienced the sexual assaults. She experienced the genital cutting. She said, what President Obama doesn't understand is to compromise in the Muslim mindset is to lose, to be defeated, to be shamed. That there's a source of shame. Again, if you went to law school and you take contracts, you think, well, no, we negotiate. They're not seeing it that way. There is a reason why we did so bad in the negotiation, right? And guess what? Donald Trump wouldn't have done any better in the negotiation. They're not negotiating. They're not interested in that. They're not interested in common ground. They're not interested in give and take. You know, this is not some, you know, shook where people are like handling over the dates, right? For them, this was life or death. This had to do about their own sense of pride, their sense of national dignity, and they weren't going to have it. They weren't going to have anyone impose upon them rules that they couldn't live by. And that's why we have a bad deal, because to them, you know, the concept of compromise is a submission, and the only submission that's worthy is the submission for God, the submission for Allah. And nothing else would matter, nothing else is important in any way. And so we read things in the newspapers, but we don't make connections. We don't think about what's really on the other side of that bargaining table, what the kinds of people, what they value, how they understand the world, how they practice, how they treat their own people, right? You know, I tell my human rights students all the time, by the way, for years, I'm one of the few people that likes to, I constantly bring up the human rights violations committed in the name of Islam. You're not allowed to say that in the United States. I just said it. The human rights violations, keep doing that. The human rights violations committed under the name of Islam. And, you know, where are the feminists on this? They should be outraged. I say this every year. Where are you if you're a feminist? Where are the homosexuals on this? Yeah, gay marriage is important, but you know, there are gay people throughout the Middle East, not just ISIS, that get variations of, we'll burn you in a chair and we'll throw you off a building, right? And we're so casual as we go, well, you know, we certainly don't want to interfere with their affairs, but that's how they understand the treatment of their own people. We don't see Islam in that way as a human rights problem, right? It's a religion, but the way it's practiced in some places, I know this bothers Ben Affleck to no degree. You may not have gotten that joke, but you know, we're not being honest. We're not allowing ourselves to be intellectually honest. In Saudi Arabia, there was a woman that was lashed 70 times for sitting in a car with an unmarried man and listening to the radio. She was lashed 70 times. There was a woman who worked as a producer on a television show, and she was lashed also over 50 times, went to jail, because the host of the show, a male, was showing sex toys. By the way, I think that's unbelievable that they were showing sex toys on a Saudi Arabian television, but she wasn't even the producer. She was just a woman, and because she was a woman and was there, and let me say, I'm speaking to as someone who understands the law. This is not tribal justice. These are justice committed under color of law. This is what you get. This is what you get under the law. This is not, we think, well, you know, these are tribal frontier justice. No, this is the penalty you get under Sharia law. This is what is implemented. This is what's ultimately handed down and delivered. Remember the story of the woman on the cover of Time magazine? She didn't want to be on the cover of Time magazine. She was missing a nose and an ear. Remember that, right? Missing a nose and an ear. Why? You know, she was trying to run away from her husband because he was off fighting some war of insanity somewhere, and his in-laws were forcing she and her sister to live with the pigs. So she ran away, and he claimed that he was so embarrassed by this that he had the right under Islamic law to cut off her nose, because to cut off a nose is the shame of not having a nose. What? Right? This was on the cover of Time magazine. Go Google this. You won't be able to have dessert. Forget the cheesecake tonight. But there is Time magazine courageously put her on the cover. Here's the good news. She was eventually smuggled out of Afghanistan. She was brought to the United States. She underwent, I think, 30 surgeries, and she was sent back with sort of a nose and her ear of some kind. But this is essentially under color of law, and we don't. We're not honest about it, and this is very troubling. The human rights dimension of it. We are also very dismissive of, oh yeah, right, people don't kill for 17 versions. Yeah, they do, actually. They actually do. These are people that live in repressive societies. They can't get laid. They are not on a date. They don't have pornography. And they've been told, and I actually tell you, I reviewed a book many years ago, for the Washington Post that it was a book on comparative religions. So, Rabbi, I can tell you that I skimmed the Jewish part because I thought I sort of knew that. And I skimmed sort of the Christian part because I thought, but I was fascinated by the Muslim part, which is Islam, which was really interesting to me. And one of the things that I was struck by, I think the author, I can't remember the author's name, but it was about all the world religions. It was Taoism. But in Islam, this explains the Muhammad prophets, by the way. It explains it completely. I mean, the cartoons, which I'll also talk about shortly. He said in the book, in the Quran, the descriptions of virgins in the afterlife, what they look like, these virgins, very clear, concrete, and again, I didn't read the Quran, so I'm just reporting to you what he reported in his book. Breasts are spoken of, lusciousness of breasts, rivers of honey, right? Everything is described in very sexualized terms. I mean, for people who are psychologists or psychiatrists, you go, wow, this is incredibly powerful stuff. That the Quran it's actually a blueprint for saying, if you want sexual satisfaction, it's not going to happen here, it's going to happen there. Blow yourself up. This life is one of unemployment and utter misery, and maybe the other one is where your life will really be meaningful. In Ayaan Hirsi Ali's most recent book, again, I hope you all know who she is. She's a Somalian human rights activist. On behalf of women, by the way, she's the one feminist that I know that is committed to pointing out the human rights violations that are committed against women. And of course, she is, derisively referred to as an Islamophobe. She's not allowed at university. Remember, this is the woman who was disinvited to Brandeis University to give the commencement address and to receive an honorary degree. Why? Because she criticizes Islam and the practices against women. What? You can't say that. Remember I just said that 10 minutes ago? I said, I keep doing that. I know it bothers people, but I just keep doing it. Right? Well, she does it too, and she wound up being disinvited. She was also disinvited from Yale. She was people rose up and said, she hates Islam. Instead of saying, where are you people? Don't you see the crimes committed against women in the Islamic world? Don't you see that? Don't you want to do something about it? In her book, she actually said something, and I know this, we're on television, so I hesitate to tell the story, but I was surprised that the reviews didn't pick up on it, and maybe because it was so un-PC that it couldn't be repeated. So I'm going to do it here today. So in the book, I did it again. She tells this story. She said she first comes to Denmark from Germany. She escaped from having to marry someone, arranged marriage in Canada. She basically got on another plane and left her family goodbye and went to Holland. And she, ended up going to school, and she became a legislator in the Dutch Parliament. And she tells the story that when she first got to Amsterdam, she lived in a housing project because she was a poor person from at the time, where was she? I think she was either from Somalia or she might have been in Saudi Arabia at that point, or Somalia at that point. So she tells this story about how half the people in the complex were Islamic Muslims, and half were Dutch people who were from Holland in this housing complex. And there became this terrible situation because the people who were from Holland were observing that the Muslim kids were running wild and creating havoc as gangs, and there was a lot of trash left everywhere. There was no upkeeping of the gardens and the area in the area. Now again, this sounds horribly anti-PC. It must be terrible to hear this. But she was just saying, this is what happened. And you know what she says? She says, it's because people from my world, her world, don't see this world as mattering. It doesn't matter where your kids go, what they do, whether they get educated. And it doesn't matter if your place looks clean and it's something you take pride in. It just doesn't matter because the good stuff comes later. This isn't even rehearsal. This is nothing. And it's a very harsh statement in a book. It's an anecdote that's very powerful, I think. You can think it's Islamophobic. It may be, maybe anti-PC, but it is one that she was courageous enough to at least talk about, And what she's talking about is this endless obsession with the afterlife, which is where the world of suicide bombing gets its strength, right? Because it's something that you can actually get behind. Here's another statistic, percentage numbers. Between 50 and 75% of Muslims polled throughout the Middle East, North Africa, and the Persian Gulf say that they want to live under strict Islamic law, Sharia law. That's incredible. 3/4, I think the number really is 66%, the average. 66% of people, 2 out of every 3 people, actually want to live under strict application, adherence to Islamic law. And this explains a lot, right? It explains why when Arab Spring failed, everyone was so excited about Arab Spring. We took pictures of all these kids at Tahrir Square, and they were tweeting, and they were working their Facebook page. There were 6 of them. You overestimated what it was. The vast majority of people want the Muslim Brotherhood. That's what they want. They don't want these democratizing influences. We wish that it were true. George W. Bush learned the same thing as well. This program of democracy promotion, as if every country democracy sticks with, doesn't stick everywhere. It doesn't work everywhere. There are some places in the world that simply will reject it. And it's something that we have to now confront. That's exactly what happened with Arab Spring. That's why it ended up becoming such a colossal failure. It's because what they didn't want was the authoritarian dictators that they had before. They were sick of Mubarak. They were endless. They're sick of Assad. They were sick of Gaddafi. They're sick of those guys. They were sick of Saddam Hussein. But that doesn't mean they're ready for Ted Kennedy, right? That doesn't mean they're ready for this kind of democratic impulses. It doesn't mean that. Don't mischaracterize what it was. And we made a crucial mistake. Again, not understanding what they really wanted, the vast majority. Again, not everyone, please don't walk around saying, he said every month. No, I didn't. I'm giving you statistics. 2 out of 3, that's a huge number. 2 out of 3 Muslims in that part of the world actually believe that they would rather prefer to live under strict adherence to Islamic law, which is, we know, liberal. There's no freedom of expression. It's purely anti-democratic. There's complete religious intolerance, incredible barbaric practices, right, especially towards women and homosexuals. And so we've misunderstood. We've misunderstood when they take down one leader what they're really, really wanting and why it appears as if they're stuck in other centuries. This is why. Another problem with stuck in other centuries is 2 out of 3 women throughout the majority of the countries in the Middle East, North Africa, and Persian Gulf are illiterate. 2 out of 3. They can't read, right? You want to understand, if you're not educating your women, you're not going anywhere. We know that. We know that you're not going anywhere. And they don't want to educate their women. 2 out of that's a hard statistic. Again, we're not focusing on that. We're not focusing on the implications of why we're in this position. Here's another problem. And this goes back to the 1930s example. It doesn't compare. The 1930s never had such openly, avowedly, Jew-hating, Jew-murdering language. This is the kind of stuff that Hitler would have said. I couldn't say that. People are not listening to what's being said in that world. No Germans, no Nazis talk like this. Here's some, this is one of my favorite, but you can go on the internet and see all of it. Here is a Hamas genocide bomber, all right? Wait for it. We are a nation that drinks blood, and we know that there is no blood better than the blood of Jews. We will not leave you alone until we have quenched our thirst with your blood and our children's thirst with your blood. The children, too, need to drink the blood. Blood libels against Jews? Are you kidding? Really? That's what you're worried about? Blood in the matzah? Right? This is insanity. Right? This cult of death that exists in that part of the world, this glorification of the afterlife and death. This is not unusual language. You go online, you'll see videotapes of this. These are messages by suicide bombers. The language of death, the language of barbarism. The Middle East is filled, all the newspapers have pictures of the Israelis with Israeli leaders, Netanyahu, Sharon, eating the children, Palestinian children, blood spilling out, many, many cartoons. You can go online. By the way, if any of this is interesting to you, Danny Goldhagen, who had written a number of years ago, Hitler's Willing Executioners, wrote an incredible book, The Devil That Never Dies. And it's a book on modern anti-Semitism. So if any of these things were interesting to you, some of the statistics I got out of that book, it's a very powerful book. I didn't get nearly the amount of attention that it should have. You want to know why? Because of what I just said. Because it's really unpleasant. You can't say it. He's talking about what does global anti-Semitism look like today. It looks like this. This is like what it looks like. He actually has the cartoons of Sharon eating the babies and Netanyahu eating the babies, and the way Israel is being depicted in cartoons, right? And yet Israel doesn't actually mention, we don't actually hear about blood, but you hear about drinking Jewish blood with great casualness. Again, language that's explicit, avowedly, unabashedly, unashamedly murderous language. Very casually said. Nothing like this that Hitler ever did. Ahmadinejad, former president of Iran, wiping Israel off the map. This was a guy who was then invited to speak at the UN and was invited to speak at Columbia. Now, I went to Columbia. This is embarrassing, right? It's embarrassing. Imagine if a white supremacist announced, or another leader from around the world said, all black people need to be killed. I want all black people in the United States and then in Africa, I want them wiped from the earth. Would Columbia invite this person? Would we grant legitimacy to this what kind of statesmanship is this? What did Columbia try to prove on that day? That it invited a guy who says, I believe in mass murder. I'm cool with mass murder. As long as it's Jews, I'm good with it. And I'd like to come to Jew country, New York, and Columbia will give me a stage, right? And there wasn't enough outrage, not even, in my opinion, not as Columbia graduates. Again, giving the legitimacy to barbarism, excusing it, pretending it's not really there, explaining it away. How casual we are about Israel's right to exist. It doesn't have a right to exist. No other country's spoken like that. I mean, it's a moral crime to deny somebody's existence. I'm going to tell you right now, the rabbi will tell you, for me to say to one of you, you're not here, you don't exist, you don't have the right to exist, it's a moral crime. So an entire nation, by the way, this is itself a violation of the United Nations, which requires that all countries treat each other with mutual respect. And yet it doesn't matter with Israel. With Israel, we don't treat you with mutual respect, we actually go and pass resolutions about how you have no right to exist. This phrase, from the river to the sea, we know what that means. Kill all Jews from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. Again, very casual, the way we hear these words as if they don't have meaning. But they do. They mean barbarism, right? Thuggery. And even today, the Holocaust denial that comes out of Iran, the supreme leader of Iran, even while the deal was negotiated, was still talking about eliminating Israel. I think calling Israel a cancer that needs to be eliminated. So it used to be wiping the map of Israel. Now it's the cancer that needs to be excised. Anybody remember the Wannsee Conference? Does anyone know what that is? Any students of World War II? The Wannsee Conference was a secret conference held at a chateau somewhere in Wannsee, where the leading Nazi brass, mostly the attorney generals, judges, Adolf Eichmann, of course, was there. I think Heydrich was there. Went to discuss the final solution. How are we going to gas? How are we going to do it? The methods, the logistics, the operational capacity was all done at Wannsee over 2 days. They never told anyone. They just went ahead and killed 6 million Jews and 5 million others. You know why? Because how could they tell people that they were actually going to have a conference about killing every Jew in Europe? In Iran, there's a governor named Forghani. He's a governor and he's also an advisor to the supreme leader. He published a large article in a Farsi newspaper with color maps, photos, demographic depictions of all Israeli cities and the number of Jews in all of the cities and where they're concentrated. So you could see in the map in Tel Aviv, this is where they are, here's where they're not. Here's an Arab community in Jaffa. You don't want them. You want the Jews over here in the high-rise buildings, right? And he went all throughout Israel to find out where they are, and it's very much laid out, detailed in the newspaper. And he also talks about the types of missiles that need to be used for each one of the cities, right? That's the 1C conference, right? That's what, and again, this is in Farsi. There was an English translation of this, right? This is who we just negotiated the deal with. This is the party that said, okay, you can trust us. We would never use nuclear weapons. We would never turn the enrichment of uranium into weapons. We don't have a weaponization program in our mind. This is purely for civilian purposes. Really? Really? Why don't we just say Exhibit A, Governor Farghani, right? This looks like a roadmap to kill every Jew in Israel, all Israelis, very charted specifically where they live and what missile should be used, right? And this is the one that we said, well, you know, they'll never get a nuclear weapon. They have no interest in it. I don't think so. In the United Nations, 300 resolutions condemning Israel have been passed in the last several years to 100 in the entire Arab Islamic world. 300 to 100 resolutions condemning Israel. Israel is condemned in the United Nations 6 times more than Sudan, 6 times more than a country that's still in a genocide in Darfur, 6 times more. There are only 4 resolutions against Iran, only 4, 0 against Saudi Arabia. Syria has 15, right? But the granddaddy, over 300, is Israel. Look, it's very unpleasant to discuss, it is. But Islam, as currently practiced by a large segment of the world, of the 1.6 billion Muslims, there's hundreds and hundreds of millions of Muslims for whom they understand Islam. It's completely incompatible with Western values, mutual respect and recognition, and human rights. We have to say that. It's just incompatible with what we understand as human rights. It doesn't mean it's everybody, but it's hundreds of millions of people, and it's a significant problem. We may not like the implications, but it is what it is. It needs to be intellectually said and processed and internalized. Now, one of the reasons we're not allowed to do this is because colleges and intellectual magazines won't let you. It's considered not PC. Of course, in this synagogue, if you invite me, you get that all screwed up. But in other places, you wouldn't hear this because it's just not PC. And let me just briefly tell you where this comes from. We really don't have liberal culture anymore in universities. There's a death of liberalism. Liberalism used to be that you were able to step back and judge, call attention to other values, look at 2 competing theories in 2 different hands and weigh them, right? It wasn't about passion. It was about being liberal. What does that mean? Open. Open. But liberalism today is just closed. You're not allowed to say it. You're censored. It's the exact opposite of what liberalism used to be, the idea of intellectual openness. And instead, it's all closed down. Colleges, university professors, there's no more Marxism, there's no more post-structuralism, there's no more isms. They run out of isms. And the only thing that they really focus on now is colonialism. And that's Israel's problem and the United States' problem. There is a fixation on anyone that appears to be a colonial power who's got his boot on some dispossessed people. That there's displaced, dispossessed people, and if you're a regional power, you're a bully. And that's how Israel's understood. That's how the United States is understood. That's how you can actually, in a university, hear that the United States and Israel are the 2 worst human rights violators in the history of the planet. Worse than the Huns, worse than the Nazis. I mean, you know, you're laughing as if that can't be. Trust me, go to any university. This is, especially in the humanities department, that's the way they roll. The worst countries, worse than any other countries, worse than the Huns. And it's partly because of this fixation on anti-colonial thinking. And by the way, our president feels that way too. He does. He comes from that perspective. His perspective, again, it's not an American exceptionalism perspective, although I must say President Obama had a really great line when he talked about American exceptionalism. He said, well, I believe in American exceptionalism in the way that other countries believe in exceptionalism, like, for instance, Greece. He said Greece, right? That's the one country I don't think should say exceptional, right? It's just not. That country isn't. Not now. They were once a great civilization, but not now, right? It is hard for him, right? I mean, I understand this because he comes from a university culture, which is very focused on anti-colonialism. The other thing that is really a serious problem in our inability to be honest about these human rights violations is moral relativism. Twisted, creepy moral relativism. All cultures need to be examined in relationship to each other. None are better than the others. We simply cannot judge, right? Which is exactly what liberalism used to permit. Moral relativism says, you know, you like to circumcise your 8-day-old boys. We like to cut off the heads of our women, right? Who says your cutting is better than my cutting? Now, I know this sounds crazy to you, but in the university campus, this is exactly what people would say. I don't want to be Islamophobic. I don't want to be ethnocentric. I don't want to appear to be intolerant, right? Cultures have their own logic, and they do things their own way. And, you know, so they throw the homosexuals off buildings. Now, no one's going to really say it that way, but there's a reason why they're not focused on it. They're not focused on it is because we simply refuse to judge that part of the world. We're actually any part of the world that isn't colonial, we refuse to judge them. The Palestinians are a very good example, by the way, you know, because we treat them like infantiles, you know, as if they have no capacity for moral judgment, as if they have no capacity to make adult decisions. You know, oh, whatever they do, it's no impulse control. Whatever they do, it's the Israelis put them in that position. That's not, the Kurds didn't do that in Turkey. People all over the civil rights era, Martin Luther King didn't do that. It's only the Palestinians that have this license. It's a pass that's given to them, which says, it has a lot to do with the fact that their enemies are Jews. It's a pass that says, we won't judge you, and we hold you unaccountable to anything. We hold Israel to very high standards, and we ask and demand nothing of you. Nothing. You are the victims in this play, and you just do what you need to do. And again, it's very infantilizing. I actually think it's an insult to the Palestinians. It's an insult that they're not being treated like adults, like other peoples around the world that need to be held to moral standards. Standards of civilization and civility and efforts to truly demonstrate an interest in nation building, in statesmanship, instead of just violence. Last words. You didn't think, you know, school just started. And I know that people like Naomi Volkow are very serious about the BDS movement. And that some of you have children or grandchildren in college, and this is a big issue. We don't know what children are, how to respond. You know, they're overwhelmed. They can't possibly respond to the amount of attention that's given to the Palestinian cause. Israel, every defense of Israel is rejected. Every speaker that tries to speak about Israel is shouted down. Nobody's interested in hearing about how Israel became Israel. Nobody's interested in hearing about how Jews used to live actually in the biblical times and how there is a connection. Nobody wants to talk about how Palestine was divided into two countries. Nobody wants to talk about how the various wars were started against Israel each time. Nobody wants to talk about how many times the Palestinians were actually given a state, but they walked away, right? You're not allowed to say that stuff. So forget it. It's not going to work. No one will listen to you because they don't want to listen to you on college campuses. So I have a remedy. Here's my remedy. I have a remedy. This is what you should do. You take away the moral legitimacy of the BDS movement. Take that away. Take away their academic cachet, because that's where it's from. Call them what they are. You should say the following. If you support BDS, if that's what you really support, then you support and you're in cahoots with ISIS and the Taliban and the Muslim Brotherhood. If you support BDS, that's who you're with. You're lining up with them. If you support BDS, you believe in the beheading of journalists. If you support BDS, you support the dismembering and stoning and lashing of women. If you support BDS, you think that homosexuals should be set on fire and thrown off buildings. If you support BDS, you support suicide bombing. You stand beside the suicide bombing. If you support BDS, you think that the cartoonists from Charlie Hebdo deserve to die because of their cartoons of Muhammad. If you support BDS, you actually think the people of Boston should have lost their legs at the finish line of the Boston Marathon. If you believe this, it's so ironic because Boston's a college town, right? So you think it's in a college town, that's going to be one place they're going to be really sensitive about this charge that I just made. You support suicide bombing. You support what happened to all these people from Boston who no longer have legs or limbs. If you support BDS, you support religious intolerance. If you support BDS, you believe that apostates, Muslims, forget Christians and Jews, Muslims that aren't practicing as Muslims should be put to death. That's what you believe. If you support BDS, then you believe in no freedom of expression at all. And we should take it to them. And then, when it's over and they get so mad, because, you should say, you know what, I was just kidding. I don't really think that you support all of these practices. But I'll tell you what, it does appear that you've been borrowing a cause and you're finding any excuse to hate Jews. And that you've been standing behind BDS, you've been standing behind the Palestinians because it gives you the legitimacy, the moral legitimacy to hate Jews, to support the killing of Jews. Lay it out just like that, because that's the only way to raise this argument. It'll drive them nuts, I understand, but it is at least a way to take away this legitimacy, this cloak of human rights legitimacy. They're not on the side of human rights. They're on the side of barbarians. Remember the gang of barbarians? That's how they roll. And we should take that seriously, and we should be open and honest about when you support this. Obviously, people want to talk instead about the fact that Israel is held to a double standard and other countries are not. Yeah, we know it's hypocritical. We understand. No one wants to hear it. On college campuses, your kids are going to be drowned out. But this is something that would stick, because nobody wants to be called a supporter, a bedfellow of people who behead women, right? Who light homosexuals on fire. And that really what you're really saying in the end, ultimately, is you want an excuse to be an anti-Semite. And the Palestinians have given you good reason to be able to do it. And you've been manipulating it too long because you're bored and you have no other ism that you can focus on anymore other than anti-Semitism. Okay, thank you so much.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jem, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.